The draft resolution under discussion at the General Assembly these last 2 days against Russia's special military operation in Ukraine was adopted at the General Assembly this Wednesday. The 33rd intersessional meeting of CARICOM heads of state and government on its second day of schedule in San Pedro, Belize. Various leaders of the Caribbean have joined the meeting, which ends on Wednesday. In Brazil, the town of Petrópolis in Rio de Janeiro, more than 1,117 people are homeless, a fortnight after the storm that hit the region. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. The draft resolution under discussion at the General Assembly these last 2 days against Russia's special military operation in Ukraine was adopted at the General Assembly this Wednesday. 141 countries supported the resolution, whereas 35 abstained and 5 voted against it. Among these 5 countries, we have Belarus, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, Eritrea, Syria, and the Russian Federation. For its part, countries like Cuba, El Salvador, Bolivia, and Nicaragua abstained from voting, as well as China, Vietnam, and India. This resolution condemns Russia's special military operation in Ukraine and demands Russia's immediate withdrawal. At the emergency special session of the United Nations General Assembly assessing the crisis in Ukraine after the voting on the draft resolution pushed by the European nations, Canada, and the United States, Russian ambassador to the United Nations Vasily Nebenzia had this to say.
Secretary General have left no stone unturned and knocked on every door. However, we were not listened to. Those living in Donbass are still being bombed. They don't plan on stopping at 14,000 victims, the vast majority of which are living in the LPR and DPR, were living in the LPR and DPR. The aim of our special operation is announced on the basis of Article 51 of the UN Charter and will be achieved. However, we are not carrying out strikes on civilian facilities and civilians. Don't believe the large number of fakes spread around the internet on this.
Also, during the emergency special meeting, Syria's representative to the UN, Bassam al-Zabah, explained the reasons behind his government's approach to the draft resolution pushed by the Western coalition against Russia.
This draft resolution represents a flagrant political hypocrisy. Had the US and its Western allies been serious in de-escalating the situation, they would have fulfilled the promises they undertook 3 decades ago not to expand EU and transform Ukraine into a continuous threat to the Russian Federation. And they should have pressured Ukraine to abide by Minsk and to stop the violations against the civilians in Donbass.
The Chinese ambassador to the United Nations General Assembly, Zhang Jun, spoke on the occasion of the emergency meeting assessing the Ukrainian crisis. Among the 193 members, the states of the organization. The representative referred to the one-sided stance on the draft resolution presented against Russia.
Regrettably, the draft resolution submitted to this emergency special session for vote has not undergone full consultations with the whole membership, nor does it take into full consideration the history and the complexity of the current crisis. It does not highlight the importance of the principle of indivisible security or the urgency of promoting political settlement and stepping up diplomatic efforts.
Also, the Iranian permanent representative to the United Nations, Majid Takht Ravanchi, delivered his nation's official statement regarding the draft resolution, which is considered by Tehran to quote-unquote lack impartiality and realistic mechanisms for the solution of the conflict in Ukraine.
The UN must always avoid double standards, particularly when it's considering issues related to the maintenance of international peace and security. It is unfortunate to note that the UN, in particular the Security Council, has at times neglected this principle, which has undermined its credibility. A case in point is the Security Council's handling of the conflict in Yemen. Mr. President, we believe that the text of the resolution before the General Assembly lacks impartiality and realistic mechanisms for resolving the crisis through peaceful means. Furthermore, not all member states of the UN were given the opportunity to engage in negotiations on the text of the resolution.
Russia will temporarily stop foreign investors from selling Russian assets, ensuring financial stability and also responding to intensifying Western sanctions. According to a decree signed by President Vladimir Putin, Russia's budget will also be pressed into action, spending up to $10.3 billion to buy shares in Russian companies. Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin said in the current sanction situation, foreign entrepreneurs are forced to make decisions under political pressure. Therefore, in order to give business a chance to make a considered decision, a presidential order was prepared to impose temporary curbs on exit from Russian assets. The measures range from curbs to the central bank's ability to use its gold and foreign exchange reserves to the exclusion of big Russian banks from the international financial system. The second round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is to be held on Thursday at the chosen venue to seek a peaceful solution to the situation in Donbass. The Russian government refused to reveal the location of the meeting. Moscow officials confirmed their willingness to the peace talks and expressed confidence that the representation from Kiev will arrive on Thursday in Belarus. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky conditioned the talks to the end of the special operation deployed by the Kremlin in the Donbass region, under the premise of protecting the population in that area from Ukrainian attacks. This next meeting follows consultations with their respective governments by the parties involved, after the first round held on Monday, where diplomats said some progress was made. And from our colleagues in Al Mayadeen, we have reports of what's happening in Kyiv. Abbas Sabah with the details.
Today is Wednesday, March 2, 2022. This is what the city of Kyiv looks like. The weather is cloudy and so are the conditions in this city, about a week after the start of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. Sirens sound time to time, and the noise of trains are putting the people of Kyiv and its residents out of the city towards the west is the only thing you hear with the explosions and sirens. As for Kyiv, it is again negotiation in Belarus, despite the fact that Kyiv accused Minsk of launching or participating in the military operation against it. Here in Kyiv, this is the day is foggy, both political and military. Crowds at the northern entrance to Kyiv and Russian forces are forbidden to enter the city, especially from the north, where the borders with Russia and Belarus are located.
Thank you, Abbas, for this report, and we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Cape Town, South Africans and Russians celebrate 30 years of relationship between the two nations. Our correspondent, Johan Abrahams, reports from the place of this event.
For South Africans, the ties between the two countries date back to the times of the struggle against the apartheid regime. The then Soviet Union provided financial support and military training to the ANC and its armed wing Umkhonto weSizwe. Today, the support is based on providing a better life for the citizens of both countries.
So the context of this relationship is really answering the question, what is it that needs to be done to improve the quality of life of peoples?
But the celebration was clearly overshadowed by the current conflict in Eastern Europe. South Africa's former Deputy Minister of International Relations, Mr. Maurice Fransman, gave context to Russia's military action against the Ukraine.
We see Western media suppressing the truth. What is strange is how in Europe the EU proclaimed to be freedom of speech, but RT, Russian TV, has just been banned in the EU. Another strange irony is that the NATO, which is essentially just member states, speaking about, yes, Russia is invading, but the US has invaded consistently countries in Africa, Afghanistan, we remember Iraq, Libya and others, and they created havoc.
The ANC member of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, Khaled Said, clarified the position of the ANC Western Cape on the crisis.
We are proponents of negotiations. Parties must go to the table, but we also want to make it clear that there's not one narrative here which is a pro-Ukraine narrative. We need to respect Russia's territorial integrity and Russia's security concerns, which are currently being undermined, not only by Ukraine, but by their big brothers, the United States of America, and Zionist Israel as well.
Instead, I am motivated to reflect.
Meanwhile, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa also called for mediation instead of withdrawal from Ukraine. Johan Abrams for teleSUR in Cape Town.
Thank you, Johan, for this report. And now we continue to other topics. The 33rd intersessional meeting of CARICOM heads of government is on its second day of schedule in San Pedro, Belize. Various leaders of the Caribbean have joined the meeting, which is ending on Wednesday. The meeting focused on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the region and recommendations to expedite recovery of regional economies, advancing the CARICOM single market and economy strategy to help build a more resilient community, and advancing the CARICOM Agri-Food Systems Agency with emphasis on regional food and nutrition security. The opening ceremony was addressed by Secretary General Carlo Barnard, outgoing chairman of the Conference of Heads of Government and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brownie, and incoming CARICOM chairperson John Briceño, Prime Minister of Belize. This Tuesday in Belize, banks refused to handle Christian Workers Union's transactions after an injunction regarding the $1.5 million in ex gratia payment from the government to Stevedore. The order came from the Supreme Court of Justice and restricts the Christian Workers Union itself, its president, secretary general, the officers of agents from disposing, transferring or distributing to its members or in any way dealing with the $1.5 million until March 16th or until further order of the court until a requisite parliamentary approval. Dog workers have been demanding transparency around apparent export changes, suspecting the country's two large sugar corporations had secretly discussed plans to restructure the industry and relocate the shipment of Belize's largest export to the Big Creek port, where workers are not unionized. In Peru, a new trial will begin on Thursday against officials of former President Alberto Fujimori over dozens of forced sterilizations carried out during his term in office. This is a trial concerning more than 217,000 forced sterilizations that took place between 1996 and 1998. This massive and systematic policy hindered thousands of indigenous and rural women from having children, a fact that has been qualified as a serious human rights violation. It is likely that former head of state Alberto Fujimori will be included in these negotiations and investigations. Dozens of victims and human rights organizations confirmed their presence at the trial. And General Ricardo Martinez resigned as Commander-General of the Chilean Army after being charged with alleged corruption offenses a day before he was due to appear as a defendant. The former military chief will be interrogated by Minister Romy Rutherford this Thursday for the passages and flights of the file, the case known as army fraud. The general asserted that he is not responsible for the facts for which he is accused. However, as has happened with other military personnel under investigation, Minister Rutherford could order his detention for at least 5 days before deciding whether to prosecute him or release him. According to local media, this is unprecedented, considering that Martinez could become the first active commander-in-chief to be detained. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Amid the increase of energy prices due to the crisis in Ukraine, the OPEC Plus, together with 10 other large producers, agreed to increase their production by 400,000 barrels of crude per day. At the meeting, which was held virtually, the 23 petroleum ministers decided to increase global production during this month of March. The decision is in accordance with the OPEC Plus agreement of July 2021, which consists of making moderate monthly increases of 400,000 barrels per day in order to face the uncertainty of the energy market, especially in the context of the global health crisis and the rise in energy prices due to the crisis in the Donbass, which resulted in a significant increase in crude oil prices after the European Union imposed sanctions on Moscow. In Brazil, the town of Petrópolis in Rio de Janeiro has more than 1,117 homeless people at fortnight after the storm that hit the region. The Civil Defense of Brazil informed this Wednesday, 15 days after the tragedy caused by the heavy rains in Petrópolis, that the city government has carried out a mapping of all the homeless caused by the floods in the area. According to the balance offered by the authorities, at least 1,117 people remain homeless, while 14 shelters have already been facilitated. Most of these residents, whose homes suffered total or partial floods and cannot return to them, are housed in municipal schools in this area of Rio de Janeiro and in the Rui Barbosa State School. On Wednesday, the United Nations will launch formal negotiations for a global treaty to address the planet's epidemic of plastic trash, a move deemed as historic. The UN Environment Assembly, convening in Nairobi, Kenya, is poised to adopt a resolution creating an intergovernmental committee to negotiate and finalize a legally binding treaty by 2024. The treaty will have a strong and broad mandate to consider new rules to target plastic pollution, ranging from the phase of raw material to product design and use to final disposal. Negotiators want the agreement to consider all aspects of pollution, not just plastics in the ocean, but tiny particles in the air, soil and food chain, a key demand by the many countries. The framework of this comprehensive agreement has the approval of major plastic-producing nations, including the US and China. The 2022 Global Terrorism Index revealed that despite an increase in attacks, the impact of terrorism in the Sahel region continues to decline, with the number of deaths remaining approximately the same from the last 4 years. The index highlighted that terrorism remains a serious threat, with sub-Saharan Africa accounting for 48% of global and total deaths from terrorism. 4 of the 10 countries with the largest increases from death from terrorism were also in sub-Saharan Africa: Niger, Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burkina Faso. Following military defeats in Syria and Iraq, the Islamic State shifted its attention to the Sahel, with deaths from terrorism rising 10 times in the region since 2007. Terrorism in the region is compounded by high population growth, lack of adequate water and food, climate change, and weak governments. Adding to the complexity, many criminal organizations are representing themselves as Islamic insurgencies. Now we move on to other topics. COVID-19 vaccine mandatory to access university campuses in South Africa. South African universities implement a soft mandate requiring proof of vaccination for students wanting to access the campus. Unvaccinated students or staff can otherwise access learning online. Students and university authorities talks about the matter. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.